Hey everybody, welcome to this talk slash discussion, and today we are going to be discussing self-hosting and what it means. So self-hosting, we're going to be discussing key points of it, what is it, what it means, what you need to get it up and running, the configurations, different types of configurations of getting your services out there to the internet, my personal services I host from home and why, and five, and nonetheless the pros and cons. So let's start off with number one. What is self-hosting? Well, self-hosting, it pretty much is self-explanatory. You self-host services from home rather than using public services. So you have a server that sits at home with an internet connection, and that server has services on it that can serve the public internet. Um, so that's pretty much what self-hosting is. You have a server box or multiple server boxes, and they have services on those server boxes that you can host yourself. What you need for it, the minimums what you need from it. This is not the recommendations. Everyone's recommendation is different, but at minimum, all you need is a computer, because remember, a server, all it is just a computer that has services running on it that serves purposes. So you don't necessarily need a big server to serve a lot of information. It could be as simple as using a computer as a server, and then that serves your information. So a computer or a server is more recommended for redundancy, but if you just want to self-host it from home and you don't want to be complicated, a computer is fine. It'll do the job, but just make sure you've got backups of your server or your services that you're running, just in case something goes wrong. And you need an internet connection and a modem router. Well, that'll vary depending on how you receive and how your internet is sent and received. But that's pretty much the basic things you need for self-hosting. So, number three, configuring and self-host. Configuring and some of the methods that you need to for self-hosting. So this is split up into three subcategories, because these three things, or these three ways that come to mind on how to self-host. We're going to go through the less recommended, and then we're going to go to the more recommended, and then the middle. So the less recommended, sorry, I'm pulling the fingers, I know, because it's the less recommended, which I'll use the middle finger for, and that is port forwarding. So port forwarding, just to break computer jargon down into basics so people can understand, you have a firewall, and a firewall serves as prediction between the internet and your internal devices, or your devices that connect to your local Wi-Fi or LAN, whatever, how you have got them connected. So the firewall separates your devices and devices that are on the internet, and every home and business has a firewall. So what port forwarding does, it allows certain ports to flow through the firewall. So for example, a default HTTP web server is on port 80. So if I was hosting a web server from one of my computers on the internal network, I would put in the port forwarding settings, the private IP address of that computer, whatever that is, and the port number that I want to open on the firewall. So what happens is, if someone enters your public IP address followed by the port number, your modem's going to go, okay, that traffic is allowed, so, and also it is dedicated to a service and the private IP address here. So we're going to let you in the network. So the person that's on the outside of the network has gone past your firewall. Now he's in the internal, or he's been pointed to the server, which has all that running services with their port. So ports are like doorways in your homes. And the reason why it's less recommended, because if you all of a sudden stop a service and you forget to disable the port forwarding for that service, well, it entails you've got a door still open in your home, but there's no service there, and people can use it to cause havoc, because they can borrow into or try and just wreak havoc to bring down your server. through that open exposed port, or they could use it to access your internal network, see what's on it, and also wreak havoc with internal devices. So that's why we've got the middle finger, because it's the least recommended. The most recommended, which deserves the thumbs up, is a VPN. A virtual private network is what it is, VPN, virtual private network. So what it does is you'll have the VPN credentials saved on a computer or another modem that's outside of your internet. You'll have the VPN server on your side, and as long as the credentials are right to access the VPN server, it'll create a tunnel that goes from the the source device to the target service. So the good thing about using a VPN too is if you've got multiple services that are not that you don't even want to host and let everybody to it, you have access to all your internal networks. So if you're hosting a NAS server that's you as a private server, but you want to access it without a VPN, allows for that to do that securely. So using a VPN, that is the thumbs up recommended way to do it, because it encrypts your thing and nobody can see what you're doing. The one that deserves the index finger, I wouldn't, and that's the one I'm married to at the moment, in regards of hosting from home, is a DMZ. So DMZ stands for Demilitarized Zone, and what this does is rather than putting opening ports on the firewall, what the modem's got to do is go, okay, I'm going to take your device from behind the firewall and I'm going to put it in front of the firewall. So your device is now exposed to the internet, and as long as your server has got real strong security regarding credentials to log into the mainframe, you'll most likely be fine, as long as you don't use like words that are quite commonly used and all that for your passwords. People will have a hard time getting into your server unless they try and attack it and all that, which is a possibility as well. But the good thing about you having a DMZ host is, and that's the way I do it, is rather than having to open ports like a port forwarder, if I added new services to the box, once I start the service, it'll automatically be open, and the designated port to that service will be open. Because what it's like doing, it's like, as I said, your firewall is like, it's like, say for an example, you've got your property, and then you've got the council roadside, and maybe a little of your property that's dedicated to DMZ. So it's like having your services on the other side of the fence rather than inside your fence, because what it is you want people to stop, access your service for whatever purpose, and then you've got your stuff out there. So a DMZ is good for that. The good thing about it is if the host goes down, there's no breaches in the firewall, because the firewall still stays intact. So that's why it's the sort of half recommended. So that's discussing the configuration. So some of the services I personally host from home and why. Me personally, I've only got a 4-core i5 Intel chip that only has 1.9 gigahertz of processing power. It probably goes a bit faster with turbo. But what makes up for my little dinky server is the SRAM. So it's got 20 megabytes of SRAM, which is good because the SRAM actually helps with performance, because SRAM it's like a RAM that's pretty much on the CPU chip. It's on the CPU itself. So when information is stored in the SRAM, it's more faster accessible than DRAM, which is your main RAM on your server. So that's what makes up for it. So on that box, it's got 16 gigs of RAM. I host a virtualization server. That's pretty much what takes up most of the RAM, is the virtualization server. So that's virtual machines, virtual containers. So I could actually add more services onto my existing through virtualization. So rather than having another physical server with that uses its own power consumption and provides services, I virtualize it, so it's still using the same machine, but it's like a virtual server. So It's still out in the outside world. Your services will still recognize it as a physical server, but it's a virtual. So the good thing about doing that is if you had one big powerful machine, rather than having several machines for like 3 or 4 different servers to host certain things, you just put it in the one server, and then everything's hosted virtually on that. So that's the mainframe. So my virtualization is the mainframe, and how I got the existing the new services on there. So service number 2 I host from home is a file server. So I host a 1 terabyte hard drive, a portable hard drive, and it has a bunch of files that I host: music, documents, videos, etc. You can host pretty much anything, and the reason why I do that is because information that I give out there, since it goes against mainstream narrative, it gets banned from the mainstream platforms like Google Drive, OneDrive, all that sort of stuff. So the good thing about self-hosting it is I make the rules of the server and it stays there, and I just send out the links. So I use an HTTP server for that, because even though it's not recommended to use an HTTP server, it's not like people are entering credentials, a username and password, or credit card information. It's just a file server, which is a bunch of hosted files that you can download or stream. So there's no username and or password required for the handshake to. So yeah, I do that for family and mates, because they want me to host information and music and entertainment from home. So that's what I do. Number 3 that I host is a Rustdesk server. So a Rustdesk server, it's a relay server, and it's Rustdesk is a remote solution, a remote assistant solution for controlling PCs over the internet. They have a public server, but the good thing about private servers is it's more secure. It's got an encryption key, and also it is less likely to be compromised than if you were to use a public server, because a public server is a public server, and people and hackers will mainly target more public servers than private servers. Hosting a Rustdesk server from home is great, especially if you want more security. And also, if you're anal like me of security, I don't have to worry about a middleman listening in. Which comes to my fourth service, a Jitsi Meet server, which is a video conferencing server, and it's 100% open source. It's like Zoom, but it's fully open source. And just like, as I said, I'm anal of security, so I don't want any third party listening into like private conversations. Like if I wanted to have like real private conversations, if I knew like information that I sort of didn't want by chance to get leaked on the public server, if there's someone watching, the good thing about your private server is anything that goes through it, you control it. So I host the Jitsi Meet server from home for those purposes, for business and also personal use, because as I said, there's a lot of discussions that I think that and also censorship. So Zoom and other platforms censor a lot of information. We see, since I host it from home, there's no algorithms that I put in, so whatever is said is said. There's no censorship. So that is the 4 services I host from home personally. The pros and cons. So the last but not least, the pros and cons. Let's get to the pinky of things. So the last is the pros and cons. So the big pros, as I said, is security. If you don't want by chance, or if the public servers by chance go down and you can't have access to those services publicly, the private servers are still there, as long as your internet is on and is stable, and also your server's running. So that's a number 1 big pro, is security. The con is, since you're running everything, you've just got to be mindful of your internet speed. So if you've got a fast internet speed at home, whether if it's a fiber connection running 900 megabits down, 400 megabits up, you're most likely are not going to experience much lags. But if you're like me and only work with a 50 megabit down, 50 megabit up connection, where my personal problem is going to become is my internet. That's going to be my bottleneck. Not so much my server, unless I'm virtualizing a lot of virtual machines, and that's when the resources will be used. But video conferencing and Rustdesk services, they use not much CPU resource at all. Even the RAM, running all those services without the VMs running takes about 3.5 3.3 gigs of RAM. So that's pretty good for hosting those 4 services. And when I'm hosting them and actually running, say, a Jitsi Meet server for Relay server, it uses roughly about 10, max about 10%, roughly of my CPU resources. It only hovers around 2, 5, 8, back to 5 and 2 when I am having a video chat, because what happens is when I'm video chatting, I monitor the service's resources. So with video conferencing, it's more the internet will have a problem once you start adding more people onto the rooms, or if you host multiple rooms, and that's when you'll sort of notice it. But if you've just got like 3 or 4 people, what I notice is just the video's glitch in and out, but the audio is fine, so we can hear each other. The chat features work fine as well. They can create their own profiles on my server, and the good thing about it too is since my Jitsi Meet server is open, my friends can host a meeting too, and I can be the guest on my own server. So, he could be the host of the meeting, even though I serve it, even though I'm hosting, like, he could be the moderator of the meeting, even though I'm hosting the meeting from home, and he can invite me in as a guest. So I'm a guest of a meeting that's been moderated by someone else, but yet I'm still hosting the server itself. The service itself is still being hosted from home. So so that's pretty much my discussion of self-hosting. Hopefully I've given you some ideas or maybe some of the services you might want to host. Those are just the 4 main ones. There's several services you can host at home. You can even host gaming servers and all that, but just make sure that your resources match what you're trying to do. And also which goes to the last con is power consumption. So I'm a bit fortunate that my computer doesn't take, or it actually runs not quite bad in regards of power usage, because I run my server 24/7, so that services are available all the time to my friends and some of my family members. But yeah, just mainly worry about power consumption. So you don't want a big beefy server that is only serving little purpose, and doesn't use much resources, and yet the server itself uses a lot of power. So as I said, for the 4 services I host here on the CPU that I do host it on, it runs moderately okay. Like for a home business, it'll run perfectly fine. Because but if I wanted to have a large corporate business and trying to host that from home, I've got to make sure I've got the resources that can handle all those concurrent connections, and also because you don't want a bottleneck and then all of a sudden people start having issues and all that, or your server might be lagging. So you could have a good internet connection, but then the hardware could maybe not keeping up with what you're trying to serve, and then that can cause a bottleneck sort of style thing, or the server itself could crash, which you don't want that to happen. So I'm glad on my end it's a internet thing, so it's not putting much stress on the server itself. It's more just maxing out my internet connection, which is not too bad, because as I said, the server's not going to crash anytime soon, and it as long as the internet is working fine, it actually works fine. So hopefully you learned something new, and everyone have a good day. Sorry for the rambling. I just thought I'd do a talk rather than a tutorial, and hopefully let me know what kind of services you're wanting to self-host from home, so you have a good day, everybody, and until next time, ciao ciao.